You must realize that the majority of individuals spend their entire lives attempting to avoid accepting hate, which is not a sign of weakness. It's clarity. Society instills in you the deadly delusion that you will be accepted if you act appropriately, speak courteously, abide by the rules, and make everyone feel at ease. People will like you. People will respect you. However, that is not how life operates. It has never done so. The reality is much more unsettling. You can never unsee it once you get a clear view of it. You will always be despised by someone for everything you do. They will call you a fake if you are nice. They will call you impolite if you are truthful. They will label you as haughty if you are truthful. They will label you as haughty if you are self-assured. They will accuse you of being weak if you remain mute. They will think you are obnoxious if you talk loudly. They will consider you are fortunate if you are successful. They'll claim you deserve if you don't have it, if you only not. Can you recognize the pattern? The judgment never ends, but the rules are always changing. The first thing you have to acknowledge is that hate isn't necessarily a reflection of what you do. It is frequently a reflection of the expectations, emotional turmoil, and insecurities of others. Individuals project their uncontrollable emotions onto other people, using you as a screen to express their annoyance. You cease taking things personally once you realize that. However, acceptance goes beyond comprehension. It is a surrender to reality on an emotional level. It is the point at which you give up on a fight you were never supposed to win, because you enter an unseen prison the moment you begin to live for approval. Before you speak, you begin measuring each syllable. You begin monitoring your character. You begin to condense your thoughts to make them more palatable to others. And you gradually vanish without even realizing it. That is the price of attempting to win over everyone. You lose yourself in the company of strangers. Now pay close attention. Accepting hatred does not imply that you take pleasure in being despised. It does not imply that you look for confrontation or attempt to incite hatred. It implies that the fear of it no longer controls you. Seeking disorder and resisting its control are two different things. You remove hate's ability to influence your choices when you acknowledge that hate will always exist. Just asking what is true for me instead of what will they think is what distinguishes people who live in fear from those who live freely in truth. The majority of people are not constrained by their situation. People's perceptions of their situation trap them. Like a show on stage, they are always making adjustments to their lives in the hopes that the audience will applaud at the appropriate time. However, this is the unsettling truth. A worldwide audience does not exist. There isn't a final round of applause that pleases everyone. Millions of people may admire you, yet some will still be critical. Someone will always find a weakness, even if you are flawless. Therefore, why pursue something that doesn't exist? The moment you give up chasing hate is when you accept it. It is the realization that self-respect endures while approval is fleeting. It's possible to win praise today and lose it tomorrow. In the morning, you might receive acclaim. By the evening, you might be misunderstood. However, if your basis is based on your own self-perception, outside viewpoints become insignificant background noise. Indeed, this knowledge initially seems weighty since it takes away comfort. It dispels the delusion that you have influence over how others perceive you. It makes you stand on your own 2 feet. But that's precisely where strength comes from. Not from being loved by everyone, but from being able to stand when you're not. There will be times when rejection feels like evidence that you are insufficient, when hate feels personal, and when words hurt more deeply than they should. But in those situations, you have to keep in mind that being misinterpreted does not equate to being incorrect. In actuality, the majority of people who defy expectations, think differently, or break patterns are misinterpreted before they are acknowledged. Hatred frequently shows up early. Sometimes it takes much longer to comprehend. You won't start following your path if you wait for everyone to agree with it, because every significant path in life has at some point been questioned. Before being acknowledged, every powerful voice has faced criticism. Before it was deemed required, every audacious action was deemed incorrect. Thus, you learn to live with hate rather than fight it. You allow it to exist without allowing it to define who you are. You handle it like you would the weather. It goes by, but you continue on. Additionally, you make better decisions when you no longer fear hate. Attempting to please everyone at once is no longer a waste of energy. You become more straightforward, truthful, and in line with your own desires. Ironically, the less you strive for popularity, the more genuine you become, and genuineness inherently draws praise and criticism. That is the truth's equilibrium. Emotions will still be present. It is not intended for you to get numb. However, emotional intelligence is the ability to feel without giving up control. It implies that you are able to hear criticism without giving into it. Rejection does not have to define your value. You can deal with hatred without becoming what people think of you. That is power mastery over oneself, not dominance over others. When you get there, you no longer live like a character created by the opinions of others. You begin crafting your own role. You quit requesting permission to live your own life. Because, in the end, accepting hate doesn't mean getting harder. It has to do with gaining freedom. Something odd occurs when you no longer need to be understood by everyone. Even in circumstances that used to crush you, you begin to feel lighter. Being misunderstood does not mean that you should stop communicating or distance yourself from other people. It's about letting go of the draining need that people understand you completely in order for your life to be worthwhile. Most people are raised with the unspoken belief that if they can articulate themselves clearly, others would be able to comprehend them, and they will accept me if they comprehend me. To avoid being misinterpreted, they spend years honing their language, changing how they behave, and softening the facts. However, such promise is not fulfilled in life. Even with the best of explanations, you could still be misinterpreted. Even if you have the best of intentions, you may still be misjudged. Even if you have the best of intentions. Even if you talk intelligibly, you can still be reduced to someone you are not. When reality doesn't live up to expectations, that's when irritation starts. However, when you acknowledge this, a turning moment occurs. Being genuine is something you can control, but being understood is not. And your whole emotional framework shifts when you take those two things apart. Failure does not always equate to misunderstanding. In actuality, it is frequently unavoidable when you are developing, evolving, or thinking differently from those around you. People use their own limitations, fears, and experiences to interpret other people. You are not directly visible to them. They perceive a version of you that has been distorted by their own thoughts. Therefore, it's not always a reflection of who you are when someone misinterprets you. It frequently reflects how they see things. This insight frees you from the stress of continuously correcting everyone's negative perceptions of you, because you lose your direction if you attempt to resolve every misunderstanding. Instead of being a creator, you start living as a responder. When someone makes a false statement about you, you decide to follow their interpretation rather than moving on. When someone else criticizes you, stop to correct their perception of you rather than moving on. Your life gradually shifts from being purposeful to being reactive. The first step toward freedom is to cease letting other people's perceptions guide your actions. This freedom also has a deeper level. Because it creates a gap between your identity and how others see you, miscommunication is uncomfortable. However, that distance isn't always a liability. It might also be a form of defense. Nobody should have complete access to your inner life. Not everyone has the emotional intelligence, discernment, or integrity to accurately understand you. Furthermore, assuming universal comprehension is like to assuming that every stranger will read the same book and come to the same conclusion. It's not realistic. Rather than battling miscommunication, you start to decide where clarity is important and where it is not. You quit trying to explain yourself too much to individuals who are determined to misinterpret you. You cease putting up emotional effort for people who merely listen in order to react rather than comprehend. Additionally, you reserve your energy for those infrequent relationships in which there is genuine and reciprocal understanding. Just that change opens up emotional space you were unaware you were lacking. However, there is a psychological difficulty as well. The mind frequently seeks to correct you right away when you are misinterpreted. There is pressure to demonstrate, defend, explain, and be perceived accurately. Although it seems unfair, not all miscommunications require a response. Over time, certain miscommunications clear up. Others are not important enough to continue. No matter how much truth you present to them, some people will never alter their perception. It hurts to learn this at first, but it eventually feels freeing, because you become more focused on universal congruence with your own beliefs, direction, and purpose after you stop pursuing universal understanding. Internal stability starts when you question yourself. Am I staying true to what I know is right, rather than do they see me correctly? When you are misinterpreted and you take your time correcting every story, there is also something profound that takes place in silence. Over time, you make room for your actions to speak. Truth doesn't necessarily require an explanation right away. Consistency is sometimes necessary. Real patterns emerge over time. People may first misinterpret you, but persistent reality cannot be misinterpreted indefinitely. However, being misinterpreted does not imply apathy. It has to do with emotional regulation. It implies that you can be concerned without becoming overwhelmed. Relationships can be valued without becoming reliant on flawless perception. Being misinterpreted can make you uncomfortable, but you shouldn't allow it to change who you are, because you don't get your identity from other people. It is something you uphold on the inside, despite misunderstanding on the outside. This is the most crucial section. People are often kept small by their fear of being misinterpreted. Bold ideas are avoided because they could be misconstrued. They steer clear of unusual routes because they fear that others would not comprehend. To keep their acceptance, they conceal aspects of themselves. However, in order to preserve comfort and perception, they gradually erode their individuality. That pattern is broken by freedom. When you acknowledge that miscommunication is a natural aspect of being human, you cease using other people's approval to filter your life. You are more truthful in your speech. You take more direct action. Instead of using perception management, you base your decisions on the truth. You also have faith that time will show what is true and what is not, even if others misinterpret you at the time. Ultimately, being misunderstood does not mean cutting ties with others. It's about reestablishing a strong connection with yourself so that your foundation is no longer shaken by outside chaos. It is the capacity to maintain your position in the face of others misinterpreting your story. Since the truth is straightforward, it was never intended for truth and what you can't be. You are supposed to be authentic. The phrase turning pain into power is not inspirational. It's a survival skill. It is what distinguishes people who rebuild from their experiences from those who break from them. Everyone will experience pain, failure, disappointment, rejection, loss, and betrayal. These are not uncommon occurrences. They are a component of what it is to be human. Who learns to use pain rather than pain initially seems like something that happens to you. It comes unexpectedly and without your consent, and it instantly alters your mood. It causes you to doubt your worth, your decisions, your history, and occasionally even your future. Pain feels like a verdict in that instant. It gives you the impression that something is coming to an end. It's a part of you, not just a circumstance. However, that is the initial delusion that pain produces. It gives the impression that it is permanent. Pain is actually the most basic type of information. It lets you know where something was important. You don't feel strongly about things that don't mean anything to you. Things you never gave a damn about don't break you. Thus, in an odd manner, suffering is evidence of emotional commitment. It reveals vulnerability, expectation, and attachment. You gain understanding from that exposure, even when it is uncomfortable. Because they view pain as an enemy, most people have a misconception about it. They attempt to dull it, avoid it, repress it, or divert their attention from it. Unprocessed pain, however, does not go away. It changes. It manifests as resentment, anxiety, rage, or insecurity. Additionally, pain begins to subtly influence choices when it is disregarded. You start avoiding situations because they remind you of something that once caused you pain, rather than pain silently restricts life in this way. The first step in transforming suffering into power is to stop avoiding it and start learning about it, not getting fixated on it, avoiding drowning in it, but comprehending it. What exactly hurt me? Why did it affect me this deeply? What expectation was broken? What belief was challenged? What part of me felt threatened are unsettling inquiries that transform a new turmoil into understanding. Because suffering can no longer confuse you once you comprehend it, and control starts to return once perplexity has subsided. Pretending that nothing hurts is not the source of power. That is not power, that is suppression. Transforming emotional energy rather than squandering it is the source of true power. Significant energy, psychological, emotional, and even physical stress are all carried by pain. If that energy is not put to use, it turns inward and manifests as emotional paralysis, self-destruction, overthinking, and self-doubt. However, if that same energy is redirected, it creates drive and concentrated discipline. Pain can be compared to pressure. Pressure can either produce structure or crush it. Depending on how it is applied, the same force that destroys something weak can also create something powerful. Asking, what can this make me become, instead of, why did this happen to me, is the first step toward changing your perspective from victim to builder. Every terrible experience has a point when you have an option. Allow it to either define or enhance who you are. One traps you in identity. Defining pain says, this is who I am now because of what happened. Refining pain says, this is what I will improve because of what happened. Refining pain says, this is what I will improve because of what happened. However, it takes time to transform suffering into power. It needs to be processed. Instead of running away from it, you have to sit with discomfort. It necessitates fighting the impulse to act as though nothing is wrong too soon. Because you frequently miss understanding if you rush mending. Additionally, the same patterns recur in various forms without comprehension. When suffering is completely accepted, true transformation occurs. It starts to lose its chaotic edge when you let yourself feel it without denying it. Instead of active agony, it turns into structured memory. Additionally, once anything is stored in memory, it can be examined, assimilated, and learned from. Pain then ceases to be a controlling force and instead serves as a teaching tool. Clarity is one of the most potent changes brought about by suffering. Illusions are eliminated by pain. It lets you know who is sincere and who isn't. It reveals shaky underpinnings in relationships, objectives, and even self-perception. This exposure is beneficial even though it can feel harsh at times, because anything that is based on deception eventually falls apart. What was already unstable is frequently revealed by the arrival of pain. Thus, suffering is more than just devastation, it's a correction. Emotional fortitude is another change brought about by suffering. Your personal notion of impossible shifts as you make it through something that previously seemed intolerable. You discover that you're more resilient than you previously believed, and that insight turns into a subdued kind of self-assurance. Not overbearing assurance, not conceited self-assurance. Resilience that is grounded, the kind that doesn't rely on everything working out. Because you have already experienced emotional anguish, you no longer fear it as much. And that alters your course in life. However, embracing suffering as fuel for purpose is the most profound way to turn it into power. Many people don't find direction until they are forced to reconsider their course due to discomfort. Comfort is interrupted by pain, and contemplation becomes inevitable during that pause. You begin to wonder what you really value, what you really want, and what kind of life is worth creating. Pain becomes a compass in this way. It indicates where you can no longer stay, rather than where you should go. However, there is an important warning hidden in this process. It is not necessary to become emotionally closed in order to turn suffering into power. It does not include putting up walls around your heart or acting as though nothing has an impact on you. That isn't a transformation, that's shutdown. Emotional absence does not equate to true power, it's mastery of emotions. Although your emotions still affect you, they no longer govern you. Pain still affects you, but it no longer destroys you. People who acquire this skill experience a modest alteration over time. In circumstances that formerly overwhelmed them, they become more composed. Rather than reacting, they react. Rather than collapsing, they maintain their direction while carrying intensity. Most significantly, kids begin to view suffering as a source of progress rather than as a sign of weakness. Since the truth is straightforward, pain cannot be avoided. Suffering, however, is negotiable. An event is one, the other is an answer. The choice to react rather than give up is turning suffering into power. Instead of losing one's identity, one chooses to extract significance. It is the choice to turn what once broke you into something stronger. Pain no longer feels like the conclusion of your tale once you understand that. It turns into the start of a more powerful one. Strength is emotional control, but not the phony sort where you act as though nothing has an impact on you. That's repression, and suppression eventually breaks down. There is much more to true emotional mastery. It is the capacity to experience everything completely without allowing those emotions to dictate your choices, identity, or course of life. The majority of people misinterpret emotions because they believe them to be commands. Anger says, fight. Sadness says, withdraw. Fear says, escape. Anxiety says, overthink. However, emotions are signals rather than directives. When an emotion arises, the mind immediately says, I must act on this. Additionally, people lose self-control when they mistake signals for demands. Separating your emotions from your actions is the first step toward developing emotional strength. Since emotions are fleeting, they ascend, reach their zenith, and then go on. However, your life is shaped by the repercussions of your acts. Your life becomes unstable and continually changes according to your internal weather if every emotional wave dictates how you behave. You can be confident one moment and insecure the next. You may be concentrated 1 minute and then sidetracked by annoyance. That pattern is unstable. The capacity to maintain composure during an internal storm is known as emotional control. It does not imply that the storm goes away. It implies that it no longer destroys you. Immediate reaction is one of the main causes of emotional fragility. People react because they are seeking solace. They speak without thinking, make decisions without thinking, and act without fully considering the circumstances because they want to quickly release tension. However, the majority of impulsive responses lack strength. They are a cover for regret. In the short term, they are powerful, but eventually they become weak. Reacting quickly is not a sign of strength. Pausing long enough to make the right decision is a sign of strength. Control is found in that pause, and something significant occurs during that pause. Emotion and action are separated by awareness, rather than being driven by rage. Sadness doesn't drown you. Instead, you identify it. Rather than being driven by fear, you challenge it. Additionally, you are no longer entirely under the control of your emotions once you are able to observe them rather than become them. Rather than being a prisoner of your inner world, you become its witness. Understanding that not all emotions should be expressed in the same way is another aspect of emotional control. Certain emotions should not be expressed externally. Instead, they should be processed internally. Not all insults require an answer. Engagement is not necessary for every provocation. Not all internal disruptions require quick external intervention. In many cases, being silent is a sign of control rather than weakness. However, this type of quiet does not equate to emotional emptiness. It is emotional discipline. because controlled emotion is precise while uncontrolled emotion is noisy. Learning to sit with discomfort without running away from it is another crucial aspect of emotional control. Most people use distraction, anger that seeks approval, or withdrawal to try to get away from uncomfortable emotions as soon as possible. However, avoidance only delays feelings rather than eliminating them. Additionally, emotions that are postponed frequently resurface stronger and more erratic. The capacity to endure discomfort long enough for it to subside is true strength. You begin to comprehend your emotions when you stop avoiding them. Additionally, comprehension lessens their influence over you. You start to see trends, what sets you off, what influences your thoughts, and what circumstances make you unstable. This awareness is intelligence, not a sign of weakness, because you can anticipate your triggers rather than being caught off guard once you know what they are. Being able to control one's emotions does not mean that one should never experience sadness, anger, or fear. It's about not allowing those feelings to change who you are. Anger does not have to be destructive. It is possible to be depressed without losing hope. Fear does not have to paralyze you. Although the feeling is genuine, it has no last say over your decisions. Maturity starts with that distinction. Additionally, as emotional grows, your self-perception subtly shifts. You become a decision-based person instead of a reaction-based one. Consistent values and principles now shape your identity rather than emotional swings. You start acting according to your desired identity rather than your fleeting emotions. At that point, internal stability begins to develop. Recognizing that not every conflict merits your effort is another level of emotional fortitude. Emotional selection, or the capacity to determine what is and is not worthwhile to engage with, is a component of emotional control. Many disputes arise solely as a result of someone choosing to react. Many disputes only intensify because neither side is willing to back down. However, not every circumstance requires your complete emotional commitment. Certain things are meant to drag you into chaos. Knowing when to leave is a sign of emotional control. Gaining emotional control also results in a more profound psychological change. You no longer require outside approval to control your internal state. In order to feel stable, people who struggle with emotional regulation frequently rely significantly on reactions, recognition, attention, and approval from others. However, when you are emotionally grounded, your stability comes from within rather than from other people's shifting perspectives. This fosters independence, both psychologically and physically. Furthermore, a person's psychological independence makes them challenging to control, sway, or destabilize. But it's important to distinguish between emotional suppression and emotional control. Burying feelings and acting as though they don't exist is known as suppression. When you recognize your feelings but decide how to react to them, you are exercising control. Control produces clarity, while suppression produces pressure. Control results in consistent resilience, while suppression causes abrupt breakdowns. One is avoidance, the other is mastery. Over time, emotional control builds something that looks quiet on the outside, but is extremely powerful, internally resilient. Not the kind of resilience that is dramatic or loud, but the kind that remains stable under pressure. People with emotional control do not fall apart easily because their stability is not dependent on momentary feelings. They are aware of their emotions, but not ruled by them. And this is where true strength reveals itself, not in how intensely someone feels, but in how wisely they respond to what they feel. Because in the end, emotional control is not about becoming less human. It is about becoming fully human without losing yourself in the chaos of being human. Creating your own identity is one of the most difficult things a person can do, because it requires you to step outside the invisible system that most people live inside without even noticing. From the moment you are born, identity is not totally yours. It is assigned, shaped, and affected. Family expectations, society's standards of success, cultural pressure, peer judgment, and online comparison all steadily develop a version of you that may not genuinely belong to you. At first, it doesn't feel forced. It feels normal. You learn what is deemed good, what is considered terrible, what is acceptable, and what is or humiliating. You start adapting yourself accordingly. You repeat what obtains approval. You hide what gets criticism. And over time, you come to confuse approval with identity. You start believing that the version of you that gets approved is the real you. But it is not. It is a skillfully crafted version created for survival in beliefs, not for truth in existence. Creating your own personality begins the moment you question that pattern. Not in a dramatic way, but in a calm revelation. Why am I behaving this way? Is this really me? Or is this what I learned to be accepted? That question alone begins the separation between who you are and who you were educated to be. Most people never ask it, because ask it is awkward, is as aggravated with. It produces uncertainty, and uncertainty is unsettling for a mind that wants stability, even if that stability is constructed on imitation. But true identity cannot exist without difficulty, because everything authentic must break through layers of conditioning first. When you start building your own identity, you will notice resistance, not only from others, but from within yourself. Internally, you will feel conflict between who you are becoming and who you used to be. The old identity will try to lure you back into former patterns. It will say things like, "This is risky. People will judge you. Stay safe. Stay normal." That internal voice is not necessarily accurate. It is familiarity trying to be wisdom, but familiarity is not the same as authenticity. And most individuals pick familiarity because it feels safer, even when it limits them. To build your own identity, you must accept a painful fact. Not everyone will comprehend the version of you that is not intended for their comfort. People become attached to the version of you they know. When you change, people may fight it, not because you are wrong, but because your growth violates their assumptions. They favor constancy over evolution. That is why identity creation often feels like loneliness at first. You begin to lose alignment with certain situations and even relationships. Not because you are rejecting people, but because you are no longer fitting into roles that were never actually you. And that might feel like loss, even when it is actually development. Because what you are losing is not your identity, it is your restriction. Creating your own identity takes one fundamental shift. You stop asking, "How do they see me?" and start asking, "Who am I when no one is defining me?" That query is difficult because it removes You are no longer measuring yourself through approval or rejection. You are developing internal reference points, values, principles, direction, discipline, and truth. Identity built on external validation is unstable. It evolves every time opinion changes. But identity created inwardly becomes grounded. It does not collapse when misunderstood. It does not evaporate when criticized. It does not inflate when appreciated. It remains consistent since it is not dependent on external reaction. One of the most effective components of building your own identity is experimentation. You cannot discover yourself by keeping the same. You discover yourself by attempting, failing, modifying, and polishing. Every encounter exposes something. What feels right, what feels forced, what aligns with you, and what drains you. Identity is not something you find completely developed. It is something you shape through ongoing interaction with life. But exploration demands guts because every attempt entails the danger of judgment. And most people avoid that risk by keeping predictable. Predictability seems safe, but it also keeps identity frozen. Nothing new is discovered in repetition. When you start establishing your personality purposefully, you also begin to recognize the difference between influence and imitation. Influence is learning from others while still remaining yourself. Imitation is copying others to get acceptable. Many people confuse the two. They look at someone confident, successful, or respected and try to replicate the surface without comprehending the internal structure beneath it. But imitating behavior does not generate identity. It fosters reliance. Real identity is not borrowed, it is built. And when you construct it, something crucial happens. Your standards begin to alter with your direction, even if they are popular. You cease participating in things merely because everyone else is doing them. You become more careful with your time, your energy, clears throat, your attention, and even your emotions. This selectiveness is not arrogance, it is alignment. Because identity is not just about who you are, it is also about what you refuse to become. There will be occasions when your identity feels confused. That is part of the process. Identity is not a permanent image, it is a changing structure. Confusion is not failure, it is transition. It signifies you are no longer what you were, but not totally what you are becoming yet. Many people worry at this phase and return to previous routines merely to feel stable again. But if you continue in the process, clarity begins to build gradually over time. And slowly something shifts. You stop performing yourself and start living yourself. That is the true shift. You stop acting in ways that look acceptable and start acting in ways that feel connected. You stop chasing roles and start forging direction. You stop shaping yourself for acceptance and start shaping yourself for truth. Creating your own identity is not about becoming different for the sake of being different. It is about becoming authentic in a world that continually urges you to become something convenient. It is the decision to exist as yourself even when that version is not instantly understood. Because in the end, identity is not granted, it is built, defended, and lived by you. Rising beyond the fear of criticism is not about becoming fearless in a dramatic fashion. It is about becoming so grounded in yourself that other people's opinions lose their control over your direction. Most individuals think they are free, but they are quietly living under invisible confines created by Jedi. They don't cross certain borders, not because they cannot, but because they are terrified of what others may say, think, or suppose. That is how fear of criticism dominates life, silently, constantly, and deeply. It does not always stop you totally. Sometimes it merely adjusts you slightly. It makes you hesitate before speaking. It makes you filter your thoughts before expressing them. It makes you slake safer roads instead of significant ones. It makes you stay quiet when you want to talk. It makes you shrink while you are meant to expand. And over time, these incremental tweaks produce a life that feels less like expression and more like permission-seeking. The most hazardous component of judgment is not the judgment itself. Things is how quickly you begin to internalize things. At some point, you stop waiting for others to evaluate you and start judging yourself on their behalf. You picture reactions before they even happen. You replicate criticism in your head and alter your behavior in advance. You become your own audience, your own critic, and your own limiter. And without realizing it, you begin to live a life built not for truth, but for approval management. But this is the reality most people fear facing. Judgment is unavoidable. No matter what path you select, someone will disagree with it. If you stay safe, others will call you unambitious. If you take risks, others will call you reckless. If you take risks, others will know. If you talk openly, people will call you arrogant. If you stay mute, they will deem you weak. There is no version of existence where judgment disappears. So the true question is not, how do I avoid judgment? The real question is, why am I letting something unavoidable control my choices? Rising beyond fear of judgment begins when you stop treating opinions as authority. Opinions are not facts, they are reflections. Background, fox, and when someone assesses you, they are not describing your complete reality. They are describing their perspective of a moment filtered by their own experience. And yet, most people give these interpretations too much significance. They accept transitory reactions from others to dictate permanent decisions in their own lives. That imbalance is where dread grows. To climb beyond it, you must carefully rebuild your own hierarchy of value. At the top of that hierarchy must be your what you know, what you believe, what you are constructing, and why you are building it. Below that comes input that is useful, constructive, and founded in reality. And much below that comes noise, opinions that are emotive, ignorant, inconsistent, or irrelevant to your direction. Most people never organize this hierarchy. They treat all opinions as equal, and when everything has equal importance, nothing has true direction. Fear of judgment also drive for directing the eye. Often what you dread is not even what others actually say. It is what you believe they would say. The mind exaggerates reactions, amplifies criticism, and develops worst-case scenarios that rarely match reality. You are not only dealing with real judgment, you are also dealing with expected judgment. And anticipated judgment is frequently more strong since it is self-generated. That suggests a major part of your limitation is not external, it is mental simulation. When you begin to observe this, something shifts. You know that most people are too concentrated on themselves to continually examine you. They have their own insecurities, duties, distractions, and concerns. Your perception of yourself is frequently far more intense in your imagination than it actually is. Additionally, realizing this lessens the psychological strain of constantly being seen. However, dread does not go away immediately, even after this realization. As you put yourself in circumstances where judgment is present and decide not to follow it, it eventually wanes. You lessen the dread each time you talk openly in spite of discomfort. You become more independent each time you behave in accordance with your principles rather than expectations. You train your mind to quit viewing judgment as a threat each time you get through it without crumbling. In this way, freedom is developed via repeated experience rather than theory. Accepting a challenging reality is another prerequisite for rising above judgment. Your path won't be understood by everyone. And it's not a communication breakdown. There is a shift in viewpoint. Individuals use their own constraints to understand life. Some people won't be able to see your vision because they haven't thought of anything like it. Some people won't agree with your decisions since they don't understand danger or change. Furthermore, some people will pass judgment only because anything that contradicts their worldview makes them uneasy. You will perpetually postpone your life if you wait for universal knowledge. Detaching your value from outside assessment is a crucial step in transcending judgment. Every viewpoint has enough power to undermine your confidence when your worth is based on approval. However, views become informational rather than emotional when they are internally defined. You are no longer defined by them, even though they are still heard. This does not imply a total disregard for criticism. It entails appropriately filtering it. Awareness is necessary for growth, but awareness is not the same as dependence. You don't have to absorb to listen. You don't have to become to observe. You can think about it without giving up control. Authenticity starts to surface as the fear of being judged fades. You begin to express yourself more organically. Every interaction is no longer overanalyzed. You no longer alter your personality to suit various audiences. You no longer live in a state of perpetual performance, and in that area, you start acting more in accordance with your true self, rather than what you believe other people want you to be. Being authentic doesn't have to be loud. It is consistent, and over time, genuine confidence is developed via consistency. Resilience is another silent ability that emerges when you stop worrying about being judged, because you cease shattering whenever criticism arises once you understand that it cannot genuinely damage your identity. Instead of defining you, criticism becomes something you can deal with. Rejection becomes feedback rather than harm to one's identity. Instead of being a sign of personal failure, miscommunication becomes transient. You begin to stand on principle instead of crumbling under perception. Something eventually shifts on a more profound level. You quit requesting permission to live your own life. To avoid discomfort, you cease modifying your course. You stop limiting your ability to live up to expectations, and you start acting with a quiet assurance, not because everyone agrees, but rather because you are taking action without waiting for consensus. That is the true meaning of rising above the fear of being judged. It's not that people don't have opinions, it is the powerful presence of your own direction that prevents opinions from rerouting you. Judgment will always exist in the end, but it only affects the lives of those who continue to feel that they should be in charge.